There is a story, and here is the man, Mr. Steve Earle. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to you, because you're one of the few artists who actually has the sense, or the lack of sense, to speak his mind and deal with it. But I want to sort of start with this one, Washington Square Serenade, and that there are a lot of people that are calling this record not a political album, and I wanted to know how you felt about that.
Well, I mean, relatively speaking, you know, if you compare it to the last record and the record before that, it's not as political, but I don't think I've ever made an apolitical. Copperhead Road was a pretty political record. You know, that was like, my record was part of a lot of art that was made in the States in the 80s that was about us finally dealing with, you know, some sort of post-traumatic stress as a nation that had to do with Vietnam. It took a long time for the guys that were there and people that didn't go. It was such a huge part of who we are, the fact that we were, you know, not only involved with, but started that conflict and couldn't find a way to finish it. And so I grew up. It's a war that I grew up with, that war on television. I don't ever remember it not being on television. And before it was over with, I was old enough to be drafted. So it was a lot of who we were. And that record was dealing with that. And this record it's a lot of love songs for New York City and Allison Moore, but there's some political stuff.
Who's your lady?
Yeah, I'm seriously overmarried in almost every way I can think of.
Did you say you've been married like 7 times? It's the first time sober?
Absolutely, yeah. You know? That's not. I mean, that's the thing. People tend to talk about me in terms of my drug and alcohol consumption, and to this day, and the fact that I've been married a bunch of times. But I haven't been married since the 90s, and I wasn't. You
got to hold on to what you can.
Yeah, and I hadn't. I've been sober 13 years, which is kind of hard to believe. 13 years in September, and I don't. But that still defines me to some people. But the truth of the matter is, I made more records sober than I did. Than I did, high, and I've definitely. It's the first time I've ever been married sober, and it's a completely different experience, I can assure you.
Well, I mean, I don't want to know too much of the details, but what's different about it?
Well,
I've never done it, right?
Yeah, I'm present. I mean, I'm there, and it was one of those things. I mean, it's even like being a father for me. It's like my kids are grown, but they're. I have a lot of, like anybody else that went through the things that I went through. It's a family disease, and my family went through it too. So. I can't, get that time back, but, I can try to, I can just be present now. But that's the big difference. It's not, it didn't matter. I was gone a lot. I traveled a lot. And, and when I was home, I was locked up in the bathroom a lot. So, for all the people in my life, suffered from the fact that I was an addict. So now I'm a lot more present, and I work a lot harder at it. And I don't know, if you ever see my wife, it's like it's worth suiting up and showing up for. So.
About a year ago, I rode a motorcycle into Nashville. I hadn't been to Nashville as a man. I had been there as a younger man, and I went into Nashville, and one of the things I thought about was the fact that, to me, Nashville and you were very synonymous with each other, from my experience with Nashville. And I wondered the process that goes on in your mind to move to New York City.
Well, there came a point I realized that as beautiful a place as Tennessee is, I was able to stay there for 32 or 33 years, whatever it was, partially because I wasn't there very much. Mm-hmm. And that has it's nothing against the community or what it is, but I kind of, at this point, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the States the last few years, and I really desperately needed to walk outside and be able to see like a mixed-race, same-sex couple holding hands, because it makes me feel safer about the country that I'm living in. And it just... And it was about, it was personal stuff that have to do with getting a little older. I'm 52, and I'm, I haven't taken particularly good care of myself until relatively recently. And I'm in the best shape I've ever been in. But, you can't control what happens in the future. And I got to thinking about, if I had a heart attack or a stroke or something that was, I intend to die in the back of a bus. I mean, it's going to be, me, Ernest Tubb, Bob Dylan, a few other people. I'll probably go down with the ship. But it's not... I can't, that's what I want, but that doesn't mean it'll turn out that way. And if I was, debilitated in some way, do I want to be in Nashville, Tennessee? And I thought, look, I live in Greenwich Village, and I want to be one of those old pinkos in a power wheelchair that run over my foot on Bleecker Street. That sounds like a better deal to me, for my retirement. So if I ever retire.
But think about that for a second, that you're making life decisions now partially related to how you think it's going to end. Like you start to look at that second half of your life.
And I don't think that it's not so much about how it's going to end. It's about, I missed a lot, and there's a lot of my, I wasn't present in my kids' lives, but I also wasn't present in mine sometimes. And I remember almost everything, unfortunately, but I didn't have the blessing of blackouts, and I remember almost every minute of it. So, but I do think in terms of maximizing time. I mean, this is the best time of my life. I think I'm doing the best work that I've ever done. I'm doing a lot of other stuff. I'm writing other things besides songs. I put a play up in New York. Trust me, it's exciting to put a play up in New York.
On this record, one of my favorites is City of Immigrants, because certainly in the last year, that's been a big story, aside from the war in Iraq, big story in the United States.
And you know what, elsewhere in the world, to be fair, people are talking about, it started in Austria years ago. They got a prime minister in power that's been in power for years in Holland that got there basically talking about there being the way immigration was affecting Holland. But there's frighteningly American-looking things going on around the world, and that's one of the problems, and but it is one of those things. I think that's another reason for living in New York. I love the fact that I can walk to the end of my street and hear 3 languages spoken simultaneously. And
you don't understand either of them.
Well, that's the thing. That's how ignorant I am. Why would Americans think it's a good idea for their kids to pass a law that says their kids are only allowed to learn 1 language? Now, every place else in the world, trust me, people think we're stupid for even saying that. And it's just, I'm embarrassed. I grew up in occupied Mexico, basically. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and my Spanish is I know how to shop and order in a restaurant, and I know when to run, and that's about it. And I'm really, really embarrassed about that. And it's probably true. Canada's not that much different. This is America, and that's the thing about it. People in the U.S. are really arrogant about that, and I think, it's that idea of, people in Mexico are Americans, Canadians are Americans, but they're not U.S. citizens, and they don't have the personality that U.S. citizens do. I saw something really frightening. Wasn't that long ago. I saw an editorial in the Globe and Mail like 4 years ago, that was talking about when Canada became part of the United States, not if. It said when.
But as a guy who's been called a country artist, you're one of the few in the country-ish community who does this, who says this sort of stuff. We had Brooks and Dunn on the show, man, and I asked him about the scrap that you and Dunn got in. Or Brooks?
It was Ronnie Dunn, but trust me, he only remembers it because somebody told him about it later. It was at a New Year's Eve party. And I was stock staring sober because I had been for 13 years. So I got him on that one. Yeah. It's one of those deals. But it was at a mutual friend's New Year's Eve party, which I hadn't been doing. Usually I spend my New Year's Eves with Patti Smith in New York the last few years. And that year we were home. Alice and I had just gotten together, and Tony Brown and I, was my first producer in Alice, and he signed both of us to our first record deals. And we were invited, so we went. And he was like, he was bragging about having a W sticker on his Hummer all night, which I mean, it freaks me out to even say that. That's what I thought. And it was just one of those things, just basically trying to get a rise out of me. And it was right after the election, and I was heartbroken. I worked really, really, really hard, and a lot of other people did. So.
On other campaigns.
Yeah, on the campaign. And I'll work hard this time, too. I don't know who I'll support, and I don't, I'm kind of not a Democrat. I'm something somewhat to the left of that. And I want to see a Democratic, because that's the 2 choices I have. I want to see a Democratic candidate elected. So sometimes the best thing I can do for them is not be anywhere near them when there are cameras around. And I try to respect that. That's because I want things to turn out the way I want them to turn out.
There you go. Washington Square Serenade is the new record from Steve Earle. You should absolutely check it out. It's a pleasure to see you, man.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks for coming in. Steve Earle, everybody. Please stick around. An awful lot more to come on the program. We'll be right back.